Hello, and welcome back to Pathfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is part of a series I am producing covering the various deities, factions, and NPCs in the Pathfinder role-playing game and its setting, the world of Golarion. Today, in celebrating Pride Month, I've decided to cover one of my favorite deities in the entire setting. Arshea is an Empyreal Lord of freedom, though this freedom is commonly interpreted in the context of freedom of gender expression and sexual or romantic preference. In short, Arshea is the god who champions queerness on Golarion, and, though queerness is commonly accepted and even experienced by other deities, Arshea is the god who makes it their chief area of focus. Before that, though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing or commenting below. With that out of the way, let's move on to the rundown. Arshea is an Empyreal Lord, a demigod of benevolent origin, who is capable of providing divine power to their followers, but who isn't anywhere near the strength of an actual full god. In terms of power, Arshea can be thought of as more or less equivalent to characters like Ashava, whom I've covered before, but also Regathiel, Vildeus, or the fiendish archdukes of Hell who report to Asmodeus. Interestingly, Arshea is also one of the few Empyreal Lords for whom Paizo ever produced a full stat block back in 1E. I encourage you to check it out on Archives of Nethys, since they have some very powerful and exciting abilities. It's worth noting that Arshea is exceptionally powerful for an Empyreal Lord, being stronger than both the Black Butterfly and Regathiel. Arshea is the Spirit of Abandon, a demigod of liberation, exaltation, and beauty. They are the patron deity to all those whose body does not reflect their truest self, and the champion of those whose romantic desires run counter to the expectations of society. Arshea teaches the value of personal freedom, and instructs that all people should be allowed to live and present as they please, free to express the gender identity which best reflects their truest self, and to pursue the affections of whomever they choose. So long as no one is being harmed, Arshea believes that individuals should be allowed to choose the life which is best for them, free from the restrictions and repressions of others. For this reason, followers are encouraged to experiment with their gender expression and romantic or physical partnerships, so that they might better understand their desires and discover their truest selves. The Spirit of Abandon also has a strong association with sensuality, and I can present no greater example of this than the official deific obedience from 1st edition. I've blurred out certain words in an attempt to keep this video monetized, but you can probably piece it together. I would like to point out, however, that this association with explicitly carnal activities has specifically been toned down in 2E. It's also worth noting that this goes hand in hand with a notable increase in the maturity with which Paizo has handled discussions of gender and sexuality in 2nd edition in general. Arshea primarily presents themselves in an androgynous form, which embodies the ideal traits of both masculinity and femininity. The Spirit of Abandon is neither man nor woman, but at the same time, they are both. They do not conform to the binary classification of gender, and as such, they present as a vision of loveliness and physical perfection, which incorporates the desirable traits seen in all forms of gender expression. They are simultaneously trim and voluptuous, sultry and innocent, coy and genuine. Arshea is commonly cited as the most enticing being in the Great Beyond, rivaled only by beings like Shellin or Calistria. They commonly appear in flowing garments of scintillating thin silks, which flow and dip with each dance-like motion. A pair of angelic wings sprouts from their back, and their white feathers evoke thoughts of a swan. All that being said, when they present themselves to mortals, Arshea instead commonly chooses to present as a reflection of that mortal. This presentation is simultaneously recognizable as a reflection of that mortal's form and as a manifestation of Arshea's own divine beauty and grace. This results in the mortals seeing the most perfect version of themselves, allowing them to see past their own shortcomings and see the beauty inherent in themselves. One exception to this trend is when Arshea presents themselves to a mortal whose inner self and outer self are out of sync, including trans, non-binary, agender, or gender-fluid persons. In these situations, Arshea instead takes on the form which best reflects that individual's truest self. Arshea's beauty is such that they are frequently depicted in art, far more frequently than other gods with a similarly small following. Still, artists are encouraged to add flourishes and features which they personally find beautiful or enticing. For this reason, depictions crafted by mortals often incorporate deliberate inconsistencies from one to the next. Arshea has no static realm in the great beyond. Instead, they choose to wander the planes with no discernible pattern to their movements. They have the ability to bring their divine realm with them as they travel, creating an area over which they have deific influence wherever they go. This realm is smaller than most divine realms, and is limited to about 200 miles in diameter. Arshea is also a known couch surfer, and enjoys visiting other divine entities. They offer their blessing and friendship to those who take them in, but take no offense from those who turn them away. Famously, Arshea is a frequent guest of the Empyreal Lord Limnaris, the patron deity of sex workers, virginity, and rites of passage. These visits are raucous, to say the least, and interactions between the two deities can be described as enthusiastically vigorous. While Arshea does provide edicts and commandments to their followers, they discourage dogmatic adherence or conformity. As a deity of self-expression and acceptance, Arshea instead encourages their followers to think carefully upon the teachings of the faith and come to an understanding which best suits them and their own personal needs. Broad instructions are provided to followers, but the specifics are often left up to interpretation, and dogmatic commands are vanishingly rare. Followers are simply taught to be non-judgmental in their dealings with others, and to encourage self-exploration and the development of a confident personal identity. Arshea's holy text is Ecstasy and Euphoria. This text outlines the major tenets of the faith, as well as practical information on how to effectively go about practicing these tenets. Beyond the teachings surrounding acceptance, freedom, and kindness, the text also provides detailed guidance on carnal pleasures, methods and processes for transforming one's body into one's ideal form, and advice for achieving personal perfection, both internal and external. Unlike most holy texts, Ecstasy and Euphoria is specifically designed to be notated by followers. Wide margins and blank pages are intended to allow followers to draw, make notes, and record their own thoughts and experiences to augment the base text on its own. For this reason, copies are generally passed along from follower to follower over time. This practice has led to numerous phrases and aphorisms gaining popularity among the faithful over the years. More on those in a minute. Though Arshea's teachings surrounding sexuality and gender are the ones which get the most attention, it's important to remember that they are a deity of freedom first and foremost. They seek the destruction of all forms of repression and control, and the abandonment of things like borders, restrictive categories, and external limitations. One especially important form of liberation upon which they focus is the freedom from pain and sorrow. The spirit of abandon thus encourages their faithful to seize the things which bring them joy, and to abandon those restrictions they've imposed upon themselves, which prevent them from self-actualizing. Two popular aphorisms among the faithful speak to these teachings. Quote, "You are yours alone," unquote, reminds followers that they need not live up to the expectations placed upon them by society or their families. They should seek to live for themselves first. Similarly, the phrase, "This day and all that follow are yours," emphasizes the brevity of life and the importance of seizing one's joy immediately. It's also a declaration of hope. for even those who think they've already missed their chance at happiness still have time to find and embrace their truest self. While Arshea is an angel of beauty, and this beauty is most commonly interpreted by outsiders as external and physical, devout Arsheans know that beauty is subjective, both internal and external, and deeply personal. More than seeking beauty in others, Arsheans are encouraged to seek beauty in themselves, changing their appearance to suit their evolving tastes over time. Even the boundaries of gender, such as they are generally considered to be an external construct to be ignored. Gender expression and identity can be changed to better suit a person's truer self under Arshea's teachings. A famous prayer among the faithful, the Hymn Unspoken by the Jistkin poetess Aniri, demonstrates both this desire for self-actualization and the desire to throw off the shackles of gender. Mine hands I clasp to bosom flat, such to proclaim this wish impassioned. I am thy clay, my body shape, that by thy hand I may be fashioned. Soft-curved Arshea, strong of arm, whose shapely form doth lust evoke, a portion grant me of thy charm, that truest self discard this cloak. The sentiments expressed in this prayer tie into the teachings surrounding internal beauty, derived primarily from self-confidence, joy, and self-actualization. Pain and an unhappy heart can overcome even the most beautiful physical features. Arsheans often say, beauty sleeps beneath the veil of tears. No amount of external beauty can mask unhappiness, and suppressing feelings of sorrow will never succeed at hiding them forever. By contrast, a joyful heart will bring more beauty into the world, regardless of external appearance. To bring joy to oneself and others is the ultimate form of beauty, and it proves infectious. For this reason, those who lack conventional physical beauty can still be seen as beautiful due to their kindness and willingness to encourage and support others. While Arsheans have a reputation for being exceptionally beautiful and attractive, there are many devout followers of the spirit of abandon who are not physically beautiful, but who are considered equally beautiful among the faithful. Of course, no discussion of Arshea's teachings would be complete without examining their views on sexual liberation. Carnal pursuits are generally part and parcel for Arsheans, and such activities are not only accepted, but encouraged as a part of a devout life. Arshea's own physical form is often interpreted as the ultimate inspiration for carnal passions, though, as mentioned earlier, they rarely present themselves to mortal followers in this form. Followers are encouraged to experiment with the many pleasures the world can offer, sampling various delights to better understand their own tastes and desires. At the same time, modesty, for its own sake, is discouraged, leading to many Arsheans dressing in provocative fashions, and taking a very sex-positive and open mindset when discussing romantic or carnal matters. This tendency toward sexual liberation and enticing dress has led to Arsheans as a whole developing a reputation for being provocative and more than a little lascivious. And, to be entirely fair, more than a few followers of the spirit of abandon lean pretty hard into this stereotype. Many of the firebrands who follow Arshea, whom I will discuss more in a bit, actively seek to scandalize those with more repressive views, believing that their displays will both shock and offend oppressors and inspire those whose true selves remain hidden. Of course, engaging in carnal activity is hardly a necessity among the faithful. If one's true self is simply uninterested in such affairs, then celibacy or abstinence are hardly frowned upon. Plenty of Arsheans exist who have discovered that physical intimacy simply isn't for them, and they are considered no less devout or worthy of their god's blessings. While the faith of Arshea is relatively loose regarding dogma, rules around consent are absolute and unquestioned. Enthusiastic and informed consent is foundational to all Arshean activities and experiences. The phrase, "may I," is a common refrain among Arsheans, as they engage in passionate pursuits, and followers of the spirit of abandon are encouraged to regularly confirm a partner's interest and enjoyment throughout an encounter. For this reason, they've developed a reputation as attentive and caring partners. The violation of consent is considered the ultimate sin in the eyes of Arshea's faithful, and they make for devoted enforcers of such rules. Arsheans will often be the first to step in when consent is in question, making them a hero to many throughout the Inner Sea region. Speaking of the faithful, followers of Arshea generally organize themselves into 4 categories: the uncertain, the known, the tentatives, and the proud. Though intentionally broad and with a fair amount of overlap, these 4 categories roughly correspond to how out someone is as their true self. The uncertain, therefore, are those who have yet to gain a full understanding of who they are. These individuals are not shamed among the faithful, however, as everyone's journey begins somewhere. After someone has gained an understanding of their truest self, they become one of the known. At this point, they might know who they are, or at least who they want to be, but for some reason are unwilling or unable to live their truest identity openly. As the known begin to express themselves to trusted friends and fellow members of the faith, they become members of the tentatives. This stage is often difficult for many followers, and generally involves a lot of support and encouragement from more established members of the faith. The proud, meanwhile, are those who've taken the final step in their journey of identity. They live as their true selves, openly, uncaring of the judgments or expectations of others, and are unwilling to compromise who they are. The proud see the inspiration of others as their greatest duty. They must live as their true selves and display shameless joy in their lives, so others might be inspired to seek out the life they want for themselves, even if that life is different from the one any individual proud has chosen for themselves. That being said, not all members of the faith see the brazen confidence of the proud as their path. Especially in places where oppression and domination must be opposed, the proud are sometimes ill-suited to advancing Arshea's interests, and followers more willing to hide their natures must step in and serve. Beyond exploring their true selves, Arsheans generally develop a wide variety of skill sets to aid their fellow mortals going through life. Many work with clothing or cosmetics, bringing external beauty to those who lack the time, money, or skills to do so for themselves. Others become therapists, either professionally in large cities or in their free time in smaller communities. These followers tend to specialize in healing familial divides and resolving interpersonal tensions. Beyond these skills, many Arsheans develop a practical knowledge of gender-affirming care and the various practices which might allow others to experiment with different identities or presentations. This might include methods of dressing, styling hair, or applying makeup to achieve a specific look. Other techniques might include things like voice training, or the teaching of specific gendered activities and mannerisms. Those with the right talents might even learn the art of alchemy, to brew potions to induce physical transformations, or develop transfiguring spells to aid in the exploration of physical form. These skills become especially important during the Masquerade of Abandon, an Arshean festival in which the members of the faith perform rituals intended to transform celebrants into new physical forms, so they might experiment with new bodies and identities for a day. Of course, while many Arsheans lead a relatively peaceful life, more than a few have embraced a more militant lifestyle, following Arshea's teachings surrounding opposition to tyranny and oppression. Arsheans often take up the life of freedom fighters or liberators, protecting marginalized groups from exploitation, or even engaging in outright rebellion against tyrannical regimes. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the substantial numbers of Arsheans who've joined the Firebrands. For those unaware, the Firebrands are an organization of agitators, pirates, and general troublemakers with a tendency toward all things bold and stylish. They oppose tyranny in all its forms, and are especially opposed to Cheliacs and other evil empires. The faith of Arshea is, unsurprisingly, popular among the firebrands, and the church is one of the organization's strongest allies. Arshean firebrands tend to be almost anarchic in their opposition to societal structure. Beyond opposing explicitly hierarchical structures, as is the norm for the firebrands, they oppose things like structured gender roles, believing such structures to be inherently restrictive and a net harm on society. Moving back to broad tendencies among the faithful, Arsheans are known to participate in a wide variety of festivals and celebrations, even those with little thematic connection to their faith. Festivals tend to relax societal controls, allowing for normal people to embrace their truest selves a little more easily, meaning Arsheans tend to engage in such festivities with ready enthusiasm. One holiday, which is explicitly associated with Arshea, is Representine, a celebration of artistic creation. For Representine, Arsheans gather local artists from all around the community and create or display their creations in public for all to see. Beautiful individuals in the community are also encouraged to model in public during Representine. Other churches devoted to artistic deities, like Shelyn, Nocticula, Ashava, or Findaladlara, often collaborate with Arsheans for Representine. While the faith of Arshea might be found in small pockets all throughout the Inner Sea, it is most visible in the least repressive cosmopolitan centers of the region. Magnamar played host to a number of cults to Empyreal Lords for centuries, before their faiths expanded to other regions, and one such faith was Arshea's. As such, many Arsheans see Magnamar as the historical home of the faith. Absalom, unsurprisingly, has developed a large number of devout Arsheans, and the temple in the city at the center of the world supposedly houses the statue of Celadine, whom I will discuss in a moment. Prior to the Red Revolution, Galt once played host to the Arshean Church, and with recent developments in the nation, the followers of the Spirit of Abandon might seek to re-establish their foothold there. Recently, Kintargo, the City of Silver, has become a shining beacon of freedom and artistic expression, which is nearly unrivaled on Golarion, and the followers of Arshea have taken notice. Seeking to liberate the hearts and minds of the repressed former citizens of Cheliax, many Arsheans have taken up residence in the city, and have only pushed the artistic and libertine tendencies of the citizenry even further. Though I haven't found much explicit evidence of Arshean activity in Vidrian, I would not be at all surprised if the church exploded in popularity in that nation in the coming years. Arshean temples tend to be airy and open, at least in regions where the weather is amenable to such design sensibilities. This design tendency is intended to represent the unrestricted nature of Arshea's teachings, and their belief that no one path is right for all people. Of course, a few more restrictive and private rooms are present in these temples, which often serve as living quarters and storage areas for art supplies, textiles, clothing, accessories, and makeup. One notable fixture in all temples is the Chamber of the Other, a sacred ceremonial space intended to aid in self-discovery and experimentation. Those who willingly and knowingly enter the chamber are blindfolded. The experts among the temple staff then set to work using clothing and makeup to transform the subject into a new physical form. At the end of the ceremony, the blindfold is removed, and the subject is encouraged to study themselves in the room's many mirrors. They are then asked to examine their feelings about the transformation, and determine if, perhaps, there might be some aspect of themselves which they would like to explore further in the future. Thinking back to the categories I described earlier, this experience can mark their first step from the uncertain to the known. History and legends. Two separate legends exist surrounding Arshea's origins. The first relates them to the history of Abadar. Abadar is the master of the First Vault, a realm which contains the Platonic ideals of all things. For instance, the perfect sword is stored in the First Vault. The perfect boat is also stored in the First Vault, as is the perfect castle. In the same way, representations of concepts are also stored in the vault, things like the representation of the written word and the representation of wealth, or even the representation of bravery. This legend claims that Arshea was once a denizen of the vault, the ideal of gender and attraction. But this life of solitude and isolation brought Arshea nothing but sorrow, and Abadar took pity upon them. He freed them from the vault, and Arshea took up their emphasis on freedom as a result. I like this story and how it relates to the broader lore, but I don't like the idea of Arshea, the meta-representative of queerness in the Pathfinder Pantheon, needing to be freed by an external force. It also feels a little objectifying. That said, this story does present some very rich opportunities for storytelling, which could be fun to explore. Personally, I much prefer the second origin myth, which ties Arshea's origin to the Rune Lords of Thassalon. When Sorshan was first appointed to the position of Rune Lord by First King Zin, she was the champion of the virtue of love. This virtuosity didn't last, however, as Sorshan and her 6 peers quickly abandoned their values and instead embraced the 7 runic sins as a source of power. Sorshan became the Rune Lord of Lust, representing the evil aspects of carnality. According to this myth, the virtuosity, which Sorshan abandoned, took on a form of its own, coalescing into the spirit of abandon, and embodying the most virtuous aspects of sensuality, gender expression, and beauty. I really like this myth, and not only because it ties into Thessalonian history, of which I'm a huge fan. I like the way this myth makes it very clear that carnal desire can be virtuous or sinful, a distinction which is often neglected in most media. I also like the independence and agency this ascribes to Arshea. They weren't freed by someone else, but instead manifested a perfect form for themselves in the face of having been abandoned and cast off. Interestingly, Arshea themselves has never confirmed or denied the veracity of any of these stories, and seems to derive at least some amusement from questions on the matter. Beyond these origin stories, the followers of Arshea are well versed in the tale of Celadine. Celadine was a sculptor in Absalom, whose skill in stone carving was incredible. Though she'd been born with a male body, Celadine knew in her heart that she was a woman. Frustrated by the disconnect between her inner and outer selves, Celadine channeled her pain through her work, carving a statue which represented her ideal physical form, the manifestation of her truest self as she perceived it. Such was her desperate passion that Celadine pursued this work to all forms of self-care, foregoing food, drink, and even sleep in her search for satisfaction and affirmation. As she struck the final blow with her chisel, she collapsed to her knees and slipped into unconsciousness. When she came to, she was standing in her studio, looking down at a stone statue of a young man on his knees, with a mournful expression upon his face and a chisel in his hand. Celadine had been transformed, given the form she'd created for herself by Arshea's direct intervention. Supposedly, the statue which Celadine left behind in her studio that day still exists, and is housed in the Arshean temple in Absalom. A statue matching that description certainly exists in the temple, though no proof exists to tie it directly to a historic artist named Celadine. In recent years, the redemption of the succubus Arshea has become a significant event in the history of the Arshean Church, and the history of fiends in the Pathfinder universe. Minor spoilers ahead for the Wrath of the Righteous adventure path. Arshea was a succubus who seduced a Desnan priestess, then, having never slept or dreamed before, explored the priestess's dreams. This drew the attention of Desna, who restored Arushalei's memories of her life as a mortal, filling the succubus with regret and a desire for redemption and ascension to a life of virtue. This effort was successful, though even after the closing of the world wound, Arshea feared that her carnal desires would erode her growth and pull her back into a life of sin. Sensing this fear in her new follower, Desna called out to Arshea for aid. Arshea appeared before Arshea. The spirit of abandon presented themselves in Arushalei's own form, but a version of it which was infused with goodness and virtue. Arshea then inspired the ascended demon to accept her physical desires without shame, and to pursue them in ways which were themselves virtuous and good. This encouragement allowed Arshea to embrace this side of herself fully, restoring her convictions and her confidence in Desna's faith. Relationships. Arshea typically approaches other deities without judgment at first, willing to accept them as they are unless their teachings directly contradict Arshea's own interests. Arshea counts several notable deities as allies. Their strongest alliance is with Limneris, the Empyreal Lord of sex workers, virgins, and rites of passage. While not a romantic couple, the Spirit of Abandon and the Auroral Tower have a close friendship with a well-known carnal element. The churches of both deities work together well on Golarion, and collaborate often. Arshea is close with both Shelyn and Desna, though these particular relationships appear to stop at cordial friendship. Desnans and Shelonites are supportive of Arshean sects with which they come into contact, and members of the three faiths are known to collaborate in artistic endeavors. Milani and Arshea are not particularly close on a personal level, but their shared interest in liberation often puts them on the same side against tyrants, especially where regimes like Cheliax are concerned. Nocticula, having recently ascended to divinity as a goddess of art and expression, has a lot of overlap with Arshea's areas of interest. At the same time, Nocticula was once a demon lord of seduction. Arshea and Nocticula have not had significant personal interactions yet, but their faiths are beginning to come into contact in Varissia and New Thassalon. Not to speculate too much, but I could easily see the development of a pantheon involving Arshea, Shelyn, and Nocticula, which emphasizes self-discovery through the creation of artwork and exploration of romantic and physical passion. As you might expect for a deity of freedom and self-expression, Arshea is opposed to all tyrannical deities, like Asmodeus and the Lords of Hell. In addition to this, Arshea's most hated enemies are those who violate consent or bodily autonomy, like some sects of Kuthanites or Lamashtuns. These vile views are also championed by many devils, demons, daemons, and other fiends, and Arshea opposes them all openly, though the Spirit of Abandon is typically careful not to punch above their weight class as a lesser deity. Interestingly, Arshea has a nuanced view on chastity and the deities who encourage it. While the Spirit of Abandon encourages carnal exploration among their followers, they see no problem with practicing chastity, so long as those practicing it have made an informed decision and are happy with their choice. Even Arsheans are allowed to practice chastity, if they feel it is the truest way to express themselves. For this reason, deities who preach the value of chastity are not inherently clashing with Arshea's teachings. That being said, deities or churches who enforce it without allowing followers to choose such a lifestyle for themselves are acting in direct opposition to Arshea's teachings. The same might be said for faiths or organizations which enforce restrictions on gender expressions or sexual orientation. Of course, in practical terms, opposition to such restrictions by Arsheans are nuanced, and often proportional to the severity of the restrictions. In places like Cheliax, for instance, resistance might be more extreme, and involve protests, demonstrations, and, in rare cases, direct action. When dealing with more mild deities like Abadar and Erastil, however, Arsheans take a gentler approach, relying on discussion, mutual respect, and an assumption of good faith to resolve disputes. Famously, followers of Abadar have a tendency to jokingly scold Arsheans for their perceived promiscuity, while Arsheans tend to make a game out of rebelling against the Abadarians' prudish sensibilities. One relationship, which is surprisingly tense, is that between the churches of Cadencalion and Arshea. While both deities encourage freedom and oppose repression, the Cadenite beliefs around alcohol tend to cause a problem. Arsheans place incredible importance on the idea of consent, and alcohol, even under good circumstances, blurs the lines of consent. While Canaanites certainly don't seek to undermine consent when they consume alcohol, it is an unfortunate side effect, and Arsheans have stepped in to prevent such situations from escalating on multiple occasions. For what it's worth, I seriously doubt that any devout Canaanite would begrudge an Arshean for their intervention, or at least after their hangover wore off. I should also mention that Arshea is a member of the Curtain Call Pantheon, a collection of deities including Shelyn, Nocticula, Findeladlara, Bolka, and Arshea, which is focused on the production of art. I discussed this pantheon in detail in my Curtain Call Player's Guide, but here's the one-pager I put together to summarize their deific stats. For players who might be interested in playing characters who follow Arshea, here are a few useful details. For those using the alignment rules, Arshea is neutral good, and will accept clerics of any good alignment. Their edicts are to inspire passion, to comfort and free the repressed, and to seek your true self and desires. Conversely, to judge another based on sexual desires or gender roles, or to act without consent in pursuit of passion, are both anathema to Arshea. Their holy symbol is an androgynous humanoid figure, draped in a loose-fitting body wrap, who is reaching for the sky. Arshea's domains are confidence, freedom, passion, and perfection, though they also have the alternate domains of change, family, and protection. Their divine font is heal, and followers can choose holy sanctification, but are not required to do so. Arshea's sacred colors are purple and white, and they seem to be openly displayed among the faithful, based on the limited artwork available. The white may be a reference to Arshea's sacred animal, the swan. In addition to white and purple, blues and violets appear to be common among the faithful. Followers of Arshea tend to dress in a variety of styles over their lifetimes, exploring different forms of gender expression until they land upon the one which suits them best. This leads to the prevalence of androgynous or gender non-conforming styles among Arsheans. Arsheans who focus more on the carnal aspects of Arshea's teachings might tend toward more revealing or alluring clothing, though this isn't representative of all followers. In addition to these more traditional elements of style, magical, alchemical, and conventional cosmetics are relatively common as well. As I mentioned before, followers of Arshea are known to provide gender-affirming care in the form of spells and potions to those who need them. The Serum of Sex Shift is one such tool, and serves to allow the imbiber to take on the sex characteristics of their choosing, though they maintain a family resemblance to their former appearance. A fascinating variant on this potion is the alchemical food item called euphorium, which allows the wielder to induce their change slowly as the meal is eaten, pausing as they see fit, then resuming the change by continuing to consume the dish. A lesser version of the serum is the Potion of Passing Fancy, a brew which induces similar effects, but with a 1-hour duration. Only after the potion is drunk in quick succession 4 times do the effects become permanent. Notably, the Potion of Passing Fancy specifically doesn't confer a family resemblance to the bearer's new form. This effect was intentional, as the Arsheans who developed it intended for it to be a tool for those who couldn't be discovered as they sought their truest self. I should also mention the Reflected Beauty spell, developed by Arsheans as a means to replicate Arshea's own ability to appear before someone in a perfected version of their own form. While this isn't the most blatantly tactical spell in the game, I appreciate that it ties so closely to the demigod's lore. All these tools, and many more, might be used by Arsheans or handed out to others to help them on their journey to self-discovery. Getting back on track, Arshea's sacred weapon is the flail, though I couldn't find any specific fighting styles or training schools which the faith maintains. In all likelihood, the limited scope of Arshea's faith, and their relative disinterest in martial pursuits, probably contribute to a limited martial focus among the faithful. If a follower of Arshea focuses on martial training, that focus is likely driven by a personal interest or an environmental need. With both the trip and disarm traits, the wielder of a flail might be able to eliminate a threat without killing them, allowing an enemy a chance to flee and further pursue their own self-discovery in the future. At the same time, the flail might simply be a holdover from the earlier and less mature days of Pathfinder, where Arshea had a much greater emphasis on sensuality and carnal activities, with the flail being an unsubtle reference to the BDSM subculture. I'm not sure about that one, though. I might be reaching with that idea. Arshea's sacred animal is the swan, an animal known for its grace and beauty, which is surprisingly powerful. While I couldn't find any in-universe stories which directly relate swans to Arshea's faith, I strongly suspect this is a reference to the story of the ugly duckling. As a brief reminder, the ugly duckling hatched among a family of ducks and was teased constantly for its terrible appearance. It's only when the duckling realizes that he is a swan that he's able to see his own beauty. I interpret this as an unsubtle metaphor for people who struggle with self-identity. But, especially in areas relating to gender identity, I'm not the most qualified person to make that call. In addition to swans, I could see other animals like butterflies representing transformation, songbirds representing art and song, or tropical birds representing color and expression being great choices for familiars or animal companions for followers of Arshea. The Church of Arshea is small, and formal members of the clergy are extremely rare. Bards are likely the most common class among the faithful, though clerics are likely fairly common as well. I would expect cloistered clerics and maestro or polymath muse bards to be the most common classes and subclasses by a pretty wide margin. Sorcerers with the angelic bloodline might experience some tie to Arshea's own angelic origins, while the influence of the nymph bloodline might draw someone to the faith's more carnal teachings. Emotional acceptance psychics, who chose the silent whisper or tangible dream conscious minds, might also fit well with Arshea's teachings. The captivator archetype might also be found among the faithful. Looking at the martial classes, champions of Arshea are almost certainly devoted to the liberation or grandeur causes. Swashbucklers, and especially battle dancers, will find much in common with many Arsheans. I could also see monks working well here, especially those who see their fighting style as a form of self-perfection or self-expression. A character seeking a means of permanently altering their physical body to better reflect their inner self might do so through the use of alchemy, meaning alchemists, alchemy-focused investigators, and even munitions gunslingers might have a place among the faith. In combat, followers of Arshea may tend toward dexterity-based dance-like fighting styles, meaning archetypes like the duelist, the acrobat, or even the fan dancer might be represented among them. Additionally, Arshea is commonly worshipped among the firebrands, so classes and archetypes common among that organization might be found among their followers. Due to the limited scope of Arshea's faith on Golarion, the number of devout Arsheans is relatively small. At the same time, the faith is most popular in Kintargo, Magnimar, and Absalom, all cities with diverse populations. The faith is also extremely welcoming to all, regardless of ancestry or background. For this reason, Arsheans might be members of any ancestry, though humans are far and away the most common. This acceptance among the faithful means that members of generally ostracized ancestries and heritages, like Dromar, Nephilim, or mixed ancestry characters, might be commonly found. At the same time, characters who express their gender in non-cis, non-conforming ways, or who experiment with their identity, are heavily represented among followers of Arshea. In Kintargo, one of the centers of Arshea's faith, Nephilim are numerous due to the proximity of Cheliax and Nidal. Similarly, Strix, fleeing persecution in Cheliax, might flee to Ravenel and come into contact with Arshea's faith. At the same time, due to Arshea's prevalence among the firebrands, ancestries which are common on the high seas, like Tengus or changelings descended from sea hags, might find their way to the Spirit of Abandon. Followers of Arshea are accepting and non-judgmental. They recognize that identity is a journey with many destinations, and their greatest purpose is to encourage others to continue making progress on that journey. They often cultivate the skills necessary to aid in that journey, from the creation of clothing, to the application of makeup, to even the development of transformative spells or potions. At the same time, they generally believe in the importance of carnal indulgence and exploration, though always within the strict limits of enthusiastic and informed consent. They value art and expression, and readily encourage such pursuits in others. In the face of tyranny and oppression, however, many Arsheans are more than willing to put their skills to use as orators, agitators, or even warriors, and they are more than willing to collaborate with like-minded freedom fighters to oppose evil regimes. For GMs looking to integrate Arshea and their followers into a campaign, here are some ideas. As an Empyreal Lord, Arshea doesn't have a herald, or a unique type of divine servitor. Instead, Arshea tends to see to matters themselves, more than most deities, using their unrivaled beauty and powers of transformation to inspire acts in others. On several occasions, such as with Desna and Arshea, Arshea has even been known to act in service of other deities. All that being said, if you wanted to create a servant for Arshea, you could pretty easily use an angel or an Azada, as plenty of those two types of creatures are loyal to Arshea and follow their teachings. When someone earns Arshea's favor, they might experience a sudden sense of confidence or a vision of their truest self. They might also be blessed with unexpectedly graceful movements, or suddenly find themselves irresistible to those whom they desire. By contrast, when someone earns Arshea's fury, they might find themselves plagued by self-consciousness. They might become afflicted by outward ugliness, or find that makeup and clothing suddenly does very little to cover their flaws and blemishes. Looking at broad campaign ideas, Arshea is incredibly well-suited to rebellion stories or freedom fighter narratives. As mentioned, Arshea is popular in Kintargo, a nation famous for its history of rebellion, and among the Firebrands, an organization explicitly dedicated to fighting tyranny in style. A campaign focused on these themes is easy to set in Cheliax, the most explicitly oppressive nation in the Inner Sea region. It might be more interesting, however, to turn north to Nidal. In the recent events of the War of Immortals, the Horse Lords of Nidal have acquired the Shadow Piercer, a powerful weapon which they hope to use against the Kuthanite Black Triune. Followers of Arshea might find the overthrow of Kuthanite rule in Nidal to be a compelling motivation, and they could easily count on aid from followers of Desna and Sarenrae, and even more militant followers of Shelyn. At the same time, Arsheans might experience some interesting personal conflicts when they meet Kuthanites who consent to and enjoy their painful practices. In this case, an Arshean might need to become a neutral party in negotiations, tempering the more violent impulses of their vengeful allies. At the smaller scale, I think Arshea has a lot of narrative potential in duet campaigns. For those unfamiliar, a duet campaign is a campaign between a single player and a GM. My wife and I run these as our primary mode of play, and they're a great way to run a campaign or adventure focused on roleplay and social interactions tailored to a specific player's narrative desires. This level of player-GM intimacy, and I say intimacy without necessarily implying a romantic element, is fertile ground for more complex and personal story elements. These might include explorations of gender identity or sexuality, and the Faith of Arshea is a natural fit for the exploration of these themes. Of course, these themes can be explored at larger tables as well, it just requires a larger number of trustworthy tablemates who have all consented to the same subject matter discussions. I should also plug the Trans TTRPG subreddit, which launched earlier this year, and could be a great resource for discussing these themes at a table. Thinking a bit higher level, I could see the Faith of Arshea becoming popular in New Thassalon, and especially in Eurythnia, under the rule of Sortian. With Sortian's recent turn from the sin of lust to a more redemptive worldview, The knowledge which she and her students have regarding the finer points of seduction and sensuality might draw the attention of Arsheans in the region. At the same time, followers of the recently ascended Nocticula, who is also popular in New Thassalon, might be seeking an outlet for their lustful desires, and the Church of Arshea could provide a healthy means of expressing those tendencies. The legends surrounding Arshea's origins, as the manifestation of Sortion's own abandoned virtue, might make for an especially fun narrative hook for GMs to explore. Perhaps someone in New Thassalon is pursuing some ancient text or artifact which links the two characters, and which might be used to give one character direct power over the other. Alternatively, perhaps Sortion herself believes this legend to be true, and seeks out a means of contacting Arshea so she might rediscover aspects of herself which she lost when she fell to the sin of lust. These ideas might be particularly fun to loop into the upcoming Revenge of the Rune Lords AP, the high-level mythic campaign announced for later this year. Sources and additional reading. For those of you who are looking for some additional reading on the subject of Arshea, the following were my sources for this video. The largest article on Arshea was published recently in Singer, Stalker, Skinsaw Man, the second book of the Curtain Call adventure path. This article was the primary source for this video. Supporting information came from Lost Omens Firebrands, which provided a smaller article on Arshea and context for how their faith is expressed among that organization. Interestingly, Bestiary 6 from 1st edition provides a stat block for Arshea, which might be especially interesting to convert into a mythic creature in 2e, if you're feeling particularly ambitious. The 1e sourcebooks Chronicles of the Righteous and Heaven Unleashed both provide a little more information on Arshea, though not much which isn't addressed by the sources I mentioned already. At the highest level, Lost Omens Gods and Magic and Divine Mysteries both provide a brief description of Arshea as well as many other Empyreal Lords. So, that's it. That's Arshea, the spirit of abandon, the demigod of self-expression, liberation, and sexuality. They are among my favorite deities in the setting, and do a great job of bringing some explicit representation and patronage to the Pantheon. While many deities are supportive of the LGBTQ community, and I sincerely appreciate the maturity with which Paizo has handled their coverage of Arshea in 2e. Pathfinder is a game which, at least in my mind, is explicitly inclusive of the queer community, and Arshea, alongside my beloved Radiant Prism, is the perfect representation of that in the Pantheon. To those of you who celebrate it, happy Pride Month. I hope you all feel comfortable to be your truest selves at the gaming table. Golarion is an incredibly colorful place full of amazing characters created by a beautiful rainbow coalition of writers, designers, and developers. My hope for my audience is that y'all can use Golarion as a place to discover who you want to be. I know I certainly have. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.